educational event as part of our Civil and Human Rights Council. I want to especially thank Marisa Boragini for their work on putting this together and inviting the panelists. And it's just very exciting to continue to be doing our program. And I guess what I would say, Pride Month has always held a special place in my heart. One of the chapters in my life prior to coming to the UAW was working with a family in Connecticut. Not a family. Working with the marriage equality movement, where I worked with a group called Love Makes a Family, and it was some of the best work I felt like I did with a group of people on an issue that really mattered to all of us. And it was a very diverse movement, and it was a very exciting time. So this particular month means a lot to me. On a more personal note, I have just found out that somebody very close to me and my children will be transitioning. So, you know, it's, you feel like you know a lot, but I know I have a lot more to learn, and will learn from this person. So I'm so grateful to Marisa and all the members of our union who really are committed to educating us about these issues. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone so much for being here, and I'm going to apologize because I am in Detroit and unable to stay on for now. I'm going to hopefully try and jump on later, but so I'm going to have to leave you, but I am going to turn it over to the very great hands of our Civil and Human Rights Chair, Angie Murphy, and Ardu Cow. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Bev. Be safe out there.
Hi, Bev.
Yeah, I will. I love you guys. Bye.
We love you too. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. I know this is, June can, it's tough. We're dealing with family and graduations and proms and just work, even life in general. So just, thank you for being here, and I welcome you here tonight. So what I want to do is just share with you a little bit about our council. We have, I'm like, oh my God, did I even really introduce myself? Okay, so, and let me back this up a little bit. So you're like, who the hell is this? Co-chair of UAW Regional 9A Civil and Human Rights Council. And I co-chair along with the other great chairperson, and that's Ardu Cow, and you will hear from her in a second. But, our council has been busy in the last couple of years in putting on educational sessions, forums, such as the one that we're going to participate in tonight. And we've been busy every month this year, and we're going to continue with other events. So I hope that you will just stay in touch with us and invite others to come and learn, because we're in this fight. I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. So we have to keep up the fight and keep engaged. So I encourage you to continue to join us and to also invite others with you. And I just want to just read a little bit about our mission, so you will have an idea that, we are intentional, we are serious in what we're doing. So we came up with this mission, we being the council, is to challenge and educate on systemic oppression in all forms and intersections, including racism, sexism, colorism, ethnocentrism, sizeism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and discrimination for being a member of an underrepresented religious group. This is our mission. We're here to support and uplift the voices of marginalized members who have experienced this oppression. We recognize that systemic oppression pervades all systems affecting movements, including environmental, health, and economic justice. And that's just a starting point. So you see here that we embrace all, and that's why we're here tonight, to celebrate Pride Month. And, just to share a little bit, my personal feeling about Pride Month. Pride Month, it is a celebration of diversity. It's celebrating me, you, us, right? And just remember again, we have to continue this fight for our rights, and we can only do it together. Thank you. So with that, we're ready to move on. And I want to introduce my wonderful co-chair who's back stateside. Welcome back, R. R. Ducal. All yours, R.
Thanks so much, Angie. It's always so great to be introduced by you. I just want to be introduced by you everywhere I go. So I just posted in the chat the link to the Civil and Human Rights Council page, if you want to see the mission statement that Angie just read, and a list of some of the previous events we've run. Also, tonight's meeting and our previous events, previous Civil and Human Rights Council events are on the 9A Facebook page in the video section. So if you want to refer to this later, share with your friends, you can find it on Facebook. Also, James mentioned, you can see it in the chat, James, who's running our tech tonight, hallelujah, James, that the event has live interpretation. Each attendee should go to the bottom of their Zoom screen and please click the globe icon and then choose either English or Spanish and click mute original. So you can hear Spanish interpretation. I think the last thing I'll mention is that last year was one of our first Pride celebration, our first virtual Pride celebrations. And in that event, we focused on some basic concepts around sexual orientation and gender identity. And we'll be running pieces of that training again, actually next week. If you're interested, I think you can ask Kaven or Andrea Goodrich or Ashley Lewis about it. I think it's running through the Women's Council this time around. Yeah, I think that's about it. So without further ado, I'll introduce tonight's fantastic moderator who pulled this together, Marissa Boragini, who is an organizer for UAW Local 5118, the Harvard Graduate Students Union, as well as an organizer for the Civil and Human Rights Council in Region 9A. Take it away, Marissa.
Thanks so much, R, and thank you so much for introducing me and for helping me put this event together. I'm really happy to be moderating this event, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you all. Thank you to everybody for coming, and thank you to our support staff who are helping us out tonight. I am just going to get right into it and share my screen so we can get into all this amazing content that we have planned for this evening. And I'll say if at any point you have questions throughout this event, you're very welcome to shoot me a DM through the chat or just put it as a question to everybody. And later on, whenever we have the Q&A, you're also welcome to use the chat function. So what I wanted to start with here was an acknowledgement of what Pride means. And one thing that I think we probably all noticed in the last few years is that Pride very often does get co-opted by corporations in a process that's often called rainbow washing. And this is something that corporations and organizations can do to get that credit while they are simultaneously treating queer and trans workers disrespectfully and investing their money in queer and transphobic companies and initiatives and politicians. And over time, Pride parades and Pride Month has really become monetized and sterilized away from the actual history of Pride. So I think it's really important to acknowledge the radical roots of Pride and to strive to keep it that way, to keep it radical, especially as Black trans women are at high risk for experiencing violence still to this day. And just to give a brief overview, the history of Pride is connected to the Stonewall riots of June in 1969 at the Stonewall Inn, which was a gay bar in New York City. The police had raided the inn since they were providing service to queer people. And at the time, New York City did not grant licenses to bars that served the queer community. And that night, the community resisted arrest and intimidation from the police, and riots broke out. And this photo that you're seeing here is of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who are two trans women of color who led the movement and started an organization called STAR, which was set up to help trans women of color and drag artists experiencing homelessness. So I just wanted to make sure that we could start with that acknowledgement of the history of Pride. So this is just an overview here of what the event is going to look like tonight. We're hoping to keep it to about an hour and a half. We started with some comments from Bev Brakeman, who is the Region 9A director, and also R and Angie, who are our CHRC co-chairs. And I'm going to give us now some introductions to our three wonderful panelists, who will then take some time to either present some slides or to just talk off the cuff about what they have to share tonight about Pride in our contracts. At the end, then we'll have a moderated Q&A. And like I said, during that portion, you're absolutely welcome to just put any questions that you might have in the chat, and I'll try and make sure to get to them. And we also have some prepared questions, and then we'll end with some announcements. So first, I'm going to introduce our three panelists, and then I'm going to pass it over to Kobe to present their slides. So to start tonight, one of our first panelists is Kobe Lundgren. They use they, them pronouns, and they are a third-year non-binary graduate student in biophysics at Harvard. Their first couple of years of union work, they became a trained grievance handler, shop steward, and they were eventually elected to serve on the bargaining committee, where they focused on Title IX issues and non-discrimination. Right now, they serve as the president of the Harvard Graduate Students Union, which is UAW Local 5118, with a vested interest in rank and file organizing and contract enforcement. They spend the rest of their days teaching and tending to an amazing collection of over 150 houseplants across a range of aroid and peperomia species. I have seen some of these plants. It is truly amazing. So count yourself blessed if you get to see any of them. We also have Lisa Osa here tonight, who uses she, her pronouns and is the president of the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys, ALAA, UAW Local 2325, where she represents more than 2,700 legal and social service workers, including attorneys, paralegals, social workers, investigators, receptionists, interpreters, advocates, administrative staff, and counselors at over 20 nonprofits throughout New York. And prior to her current position, Lisa was a staff attorney at the Legal Aid Society, protecting tenants from unlawful evictions and representing clients whose federal disability benefits had been denied or discontinued. Lisa is a proud graduate of the CUNY School of Law and a bird watching enthusiast. And lastly, we also have Jeremy Davis with us here tonight, who uses he, him pronouns and is a longtime LGBTQ and labor rights activist and has served as the executive director of Pride at Work, which is the nation's only organization that focuses on LGBTQ working people in unions since 2014. His first campaign was in 1999 when he led a coalition of labor unions and social justice organizations, including Pride at Work, to develop a successful campaign against an employer who had fired him and two other workers because they are gay. And in 2014, Davis began working for the Communications Workers of America, which led him back to the organization where he got his start in activism, Pride at Work. Davis and his husband, Bill, have their personal papers and mementos from their careers in activism archived by the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. They live in the Washington, D.C. suburbs with their two dogs, Goose and Lucy. Those are great dog names. Wow, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you all tonight, but why don't we just get right into it, and I will be sharing Kobe's slides. You just let me know, Kobe, whenever you want me to change to the next slide, and I'll take care of that for you.
Thank you so much, Marisa. And thank you for the introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Cool. I see some nods. Great. So today, I just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a dive into a very young union contract, which is Local 5118s at Harvard. And so we are currently on our second contract. We just got done bargaining and ratified this contract back at the end of last year. And so we've been enforcing this contract since then. And that's pretty much been the entirety of my term as president so far, is ensuring that the mission of that contract is carried out. And so I wanted to, again, deep dive into that, or not really deep, a bit of a shallow dive into that, but talking a bit about the protections that are available for queer workers in our contract, some of the limitations and maybe some of the struggles we had in winning in some language that we did not end up winning in this contract, as well as talk about just a few avenues that we use within our local to push for change, even when we're met with those limitations. So yeah, happy to talk about it. Next slide, please. So first, I just wanted to quickly touch on some of the progressive contract language we have. We're a bit privileged in the sense that we're part of the university system. And so there's a lot of attempts from university administrators to kind of like wax poetic and make sure that they're being perceived as very inclusive and stuff. And so there are a lot of like baseline protections and language differences that you see in our contract that might not be true for contracts in other industries. One of them that was sort of already in place before the contract was ratified first time and the second time was in our Article 7, which is what we refer to as our non-discrimination or harassment article. And so this would typically be, the protected categories and the grievance or mediation or whatever process you can go through to try to resolve those issues. In this article, we do have a provision for bathroom equity. And so at Harvard, we have a number of gender neutral bathrooms that are available for student workers, faculty, staff, everyone. As a result of our contract, they've compiled a list of all those gender neutral bathrooms, and those are now published on a Harvard website as a resource for any non-binary folks or folks who may be struggling to find a bathroom that suits their needs here at Harvard. In addition to that, we also have gender identity protections under that clause as well. And so no one can question you while you're in the bathroom, and no one should be in the first place, but in the case that it happens, it is protected by our contract. They cannot do that. Another cool thing we have in Article 7 that we just won in our second contract that we just ratified are protections around gender identity, specifically relating to pronouns and honorifics. And so we noticed an issue with some non-binary student workers who went into university records, and for some reason, like myself, we had the privilege of seeing like just wrong pronouns and stuff, even though we've never provided them to the university. So that's just kind of an odd assumption that they made. So there's a new provision in our contract where we can contact university admins and they'll promptly and quickly fix that sort of issue if it's found in any records. So that's a fun new protection that I've already utilized to ensure that my identity is respected in university records, which is great. The one that we're pretty excited about that is currently still sort of in the implementation phase is we won a new article, which is called the Legal Expense Fund. As we all know, workers can go through a number of different issues in the workplace, and sometimes those issues get sticky when they're working with administrators or management. And so if you want to consult legal counsel, we now have a legal expense fund that is provided to us by management, the university, which is $100,000 per year in legal expense coverage for workplace issues. It's a really great pool if folks just need to do like a brief 1 or 2 consultation to ensure that they are, exhausting all of the avenues they have for extra contractual protections, as well as ensure that they are well represented in spaces where there might be disciplinary action, stuff like that. So it's something that we're still working on developing the full rules for, but we have a number of student workers who have been interested in using this fund related to queer issues or issues related to our feminist working group here at Harvard within HGSU. And the last thing that we did win in our second contract is Article 26, the leave provisions. And so we did win chosen family language for sick and bereavement leave, chosen family being just the folks that are around you. Not every queer person might have their immediate family around. So these chosen family protections allow them to really define who their family is, because everyone's family is different, right? Next slide. Some things that we definitely struggled with, and I'll call those contract limitations. These are things that require a lot more work from the university to do and implement. And so these are provisions that continue to be, in our interest, but not quite there in terms of bargaining. So this being healthcare coverage for chosen family members. So we do have dependent care, and we do have a fund to cover dependent care, but we don't have the option to expand that to chosen family yet. Same thing for family and medical leave. We don't have chosen family protections for that. And the big thing that we do not quite yet have is grievance and arbitration for gender discrimination, sexual orientation discrimination, or anything related to Title IX related misconduct. We do have a mediation process, but mediation isn't quite the binding resolution we would like to have. And in addition to that, Title IX really restricts some of the things we can do with a union contract based off the previous administration's final rule they handed down before the current administration. So those are all limitations that we're hoping will be solved at the federal level with this next review of Title IX, but we'll see what happens. Next slide. And then just to talk a little bit about how we can move forward with those limitations and understanding those, HJSU is committed to social justice unionism. And so not everything that we want to do can be covered within our contract or can be bargained for. And so we like to utilize our whole union apparatus to ensure that we are speaking for folks that might not have a platform. So we try to fill these gaps through extra contractual movements and activism. We do that primarily through working in our affinity groups. Like I mentioned earlier, we have the Feminist Working Group, who works on a lot of queer issues and Title IX issues specifically. We have a racial justice working group, which is sort of still in development. It petered off a little bit this last semester, but we're hoping to kick it back up in the fall. That would work on similar issues related to racial justice on campus. It's pretty common in our union to pass around petitions or start issue campaigns around very specific things that are happening. Sometimes these are very immediate. And so we put together like ad hoc working groups to address those issues for the folks that are interested. We also like to utilize collaborative community coalitions. And so a lot of this work, since we are also students, will require input from students, folks that might not necessarily be student workers. And so we will connect with other campus or community organizations to push forward issue campaigns or petitions. And then, of course, we're strongly dedicated to just good old organizing. All of these different things, the working groups, the petitions, the coalitions, those don't work unless we have folks on the ground that are willing to talk to other people to build those relationships. And so something that we're really trying to build out right now with our newly hired staff as our organizing apparatus to ensure that we can do all the things that we want done. Because if you don't have the bodies or folks that are able to put in that work, it's not going to get done. So that's sort of what we're focusing on right now. So yeah, just a shallow dive into our contract and some of the fun things we have. I'm happy to talk about anything later in Q&A. Excited to be here.
Thank you so much, Kobe, for that overview. It's great to see our contract on display. I think I'm excited to ask some more questions about this in the Q&A portion. But for now, I will pass it to Lisa to talk about her experiences. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Marisa, and to Region 9A for this opportunity. It's such a privilege to sit on a panel with all of these other distinguished folks, and I have to say I'm excited to hear more from them this evening. In preparing for this panel tonight and thinking about kind of what I wanted to elevate and share with folks, I think it's important to start by recognizing that my local and our members primarily work in a niche and kind of more, I'm going to air quote this, progressive universe compared to some other folks and some other locals. In part, this is location based. Most of our members work in the New York City metro area. But also our 20 plus employers are all nonprofit providers who primarily provide legal services to low income New Yorkers. So, on paper, they generally share some of our progressive values. And this is to acknowledge that, we are starting from a better place than some other folks, but this doesn't mean things are perfect or really even good. I think one thing that I kept on reflecting in anticipation of this evening is that one of the biggest challenges one of our new units is facing while fighting for their first contract is trans-inclusive healthcare. I think what's most important to note is that their employer is a nonprofit whose mission is to end discrimination and achieve equality for transgender people. So these kinds of issues are very real to many of our members in ways that are just kind of astounding sometimes. And so I do see the power of how contract negotiations can really impact the lives of queer workers and our members. And so at ALAA, we try to find as many different ways to ensure that our members' values are kind of reflected in the contracts that we negotiate. It starts with ensuring that we have as much gender neutral language that's the CBA as possible. Things like using they, them, theirs instead of she, her, hers, or anything else. Our CBAs also all include fair employment policies, and we also push to include non-discrimination clauses that are very broad and inclusive, and use language that protects gender and gender identity expression, for example. Moreover, and I think that we're all going to be touching upon some of the same ideas, but like some CBA provisions are often tied to very antiquated ideas and very traditional frameworks. I think a great example is parental leave and bereavement policies. I think that the cishet framework of what a family is often comes up a lot, and it's something that as a union we're always pushing back when negotiating with our employers. I can say that as a queer person, that my chosen family is just as important to me as folks that I am biologically related to. And moreover, in the past, and hopefully not the future, many LGBTQ relationships aren't always legally recognized. And so finding other ways to get those same kinds of connections recognized and tied to benefits for members to use in those kind of either best or worst case scenarios is really important. And so I think some real kind of like language that I can point to in some of the provisions that we've been negotiating recently include the recognition of both traditional family structures, and then language that includes, or someone with whom the member shares a relationship equivalent to family. So that when a terrible situation comes up and somebody needs to use the bereavement policy for somebody that they have a very close relationship to, that won't be denied. Or at worst, it's something that we can grieve under the contract. And then similarly, we're working towards removing gendered language around parental leave. So for example, it's not maternity or paternity leave anymore, it's parental or family leave. I think that we've also really switched to using the term like birthing parent, which is more inclusive. And as I touched upon a little bit at the start, healthcare is a really big issue that many of our members face, and access to quality and comprehensive healthcare is still a problem for many folks. Many health insurance policies are not always inclusive of gender-related or gender identity-related care. And so one solution we found when negotiating with management is pushing for the creation of various like pots of money that members can pull from to cover gaps in coverage. So for example, recently we finalized a first contract with an employer that doesn't have comprehensive transgender healthcare coverage. And so the CBA now guarantees that the employer is required to set up an annual fund to cover all out-of-pocket expenses up to a certain dollar amount for various healthcare needs that aren't being met under the insurance policy as is. This even includes things like binders and fertility coverage for LGBTQ employees. And so, I think in terms of thinking about other provisions within the CBA, other than like thinking about language choices and actual benefits that are really meaningful to members and ensuring equal access for everybody, is finding ways to support the entire workplace. And so what we've seen in many of our units are pushing for mandatory DEI trainings, or ensuring that DEI positions exist within an organization, and ensure that regular programming is provided for all staff so that everybody can grow and be better and be more supportive in the work environment. And I think a lot of this all starts with first thinking about like how our local is structured, and I think just as much how we're trying to meet our own members' needs. I think that one thing I think about probably every day is, are we avoiding and are we avoiding reproducing some of the same harmful ways in which our employers, have structure within a unit? I think that all of the things that I'm really talking about tonight have come out of speaking with members and listening to members. And so what all this means is that I think it's just as important for us to ensure that, all of the different kinds of constituency groups we have within all of our units have spaces to meet and talk about issues that affect them. I think that one way we go about doing that is ensuring that there are various caucuses, like an LGBTQ caucus or POC caucus, caregivers, among many other examples. But I see that the creation of these spaces and supporting members like this has led to a lot of really good and important productive conversations, not just within our local, but also with our employers. And so, albeit many of our folks are working in, progressive spaces, I think that it's real to say that they still regularly receive an onslaught of like micro and I'll be honest, even sometimes like macro aggressions within the workplace from these progressive employers. And so by creating these spaces that, various constituencies can come together and support each other has led to, some wonderful programming or trainings out of the caucuses specifically to address issues that they face and those that our clients face. And I think that that is one way in which, our local is trying to find meaningful ways to support our members. And then finally, I think, one of the things that's most important for me as a leader within my local is that I have the ability to help set the tone about how we talk about things and how we treat each other in these spaces. For example, I always try to have my pronouns next to my name on Zoom and just kind of like normalize that and find other subtle ways to show support and to push what, the values of ALAA are. And I think that thinking about DEI issues are always part of how I prioritize making a decision. Whether it's like thinking about what a bargaining committee should look like or thinking about the internal structure of the union, as well as ensuring that we're facilitating meetings and providing a space that we have as many different voices and perspectives as possible. And so I think all of this is to say that it's both a work in progress internally as well as with our employers. And I'm just so excited that I've had the opportunity to share some of this information and hopefully it's resonated with folks. And I can't wait to hear more from our other panelists as well and learn more tonight. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I already have multiple pages of notes from hearing both you and Kobe talk. I'm really looking forward to chatting more. I'll pass it over now to Jeremy.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to share some slides here. So I'm Jeremy Davis, the Executive Director of Pride at Work, and you heard a little bit about me. So I will jump in. I'm going to take more of a 10,000-foot view. At Pride at Work, we deal with, all unions, and those are some amazing contract provisions. I have to say, I took a number of notes, and I'm going to be reaching out to both of you to get copies of your contracts because I want to use some of that language and put it on our website. So anyway, when we talk about contracts, the way that we go about it is we help folks figure out the places in their contract where they can put more inclusive language, right? And how to prepare for that. So, when we look at it as, obviously preparing for management's questions, preparing the membership, and part of preparing the membership as well is making sure that your negotiating team is diverse and is inclusive as well. Contract definitions are incredibly important. You don't want a benefit to be defined out of existence for some of your members. Family leave policy, which you heard a little bit about as well, sick leave policy, and workplace safety. So I'm going to jump right in. Management questions, it's important to know if other work sites of this employer and or other employers in your job sector provide the benefit, or if other locals are providing that benefit, right? If you're going to fight for it, it's much easier to get something if there's a precedent for that. Same thing for, the difference between office staff and production staff or however that is differentiated between management and non-management staff. And what's offered there. When we look at some employers, the folks in the home office get a lot better perks than the folks out in doing the actual work. And we want to try to level that field as much as possible. Has your local or international union negotiated and won these benefits at other sites, which I mentioned? And what would the real costs be for the benefit? How many members of the bargaining unit would potentially exercise this benefit? Cost is always brought up by management. It is just a constant issue. I was recently dealing with an issue with an employer at another union, and they were being petitioned to have more inclusive healthcare coverage, and they were hung up on cost. And it's like, you know, every study that has ever been done about gender affirming care costs for healthcare, the additional cost to provide that coverage is minimal at best. And in many cases, it's actually saves money because of the, you know, knock-on issues that happen whenever you have untreated gender dysphoria or other issues, right? So the membership is important too, because, you know, these are the folks that are not only going to be helped, but they're going to have questions. They're going to want to know what their dues are paying for, what's in the contract, why it's there, why we gave up another provision for something else, et cetera. So, you know, looking at assessing and the concerns and priorities of your members is critically important. Do you do bargaining surveys, and are those bargaining surveys inclusive of LGBTQ specific questions, right? Like, how are we making sure that we're giving our members the contract that they want? Are you proactive in making space for LGBTQ union members to articulate their concerns? Are there opportunities to educate fellow union members about these issues, right? Are we making the space necessary? And what kind of education or training do you conduct with, is that not showing up? Leadership and or your bargaining team before bringing new issues to the table? And finally, what resources do you need to raise awareness with your membership? What are we going to do to make sure that members know what's in this contract and they're ready to ratify it when it's time? Non-discrimination protections are so important. You know, I've found that, you know, there's been a little bit of a pullback in terms of the urgency for making sure that these protections are in there. You know, part of that's due to, you know, recent decisions by the Supreme Court that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 sex discrimination provisions protect LGBTQ people from discrimination in the workplace as well. So looking at what legal protections exist in your state or municipality are important too, in addition to that federal level. But getting this language in the contract is super, super important. Like, what language exists, and is sexual orientation and gender identity and expression all covered, right? Like, oftentimes gender identity and even more often gender expression is just left out. Folks think, well, sexual orientation is all we need, and that's just not true. It sounds like, you know, in Region 9A, we've got some great contracts to, you know, show the way for how to do this right. And what other areas cover your LGBTQ members' needs? Are there other parts of the contract? Are there other parts of the discrimination protections, depending upon how big your discrimination article could be? You know, are you making sure that every piece is covered in the contract? So definitions, when we're defining spouse, partner, families, et cetera, are critically important as well. Which sections of your contract use the words like spouse and family, bereavement leave, pension leave, and other stuff, even like the fitness club membership use and things like that? Are there company discounts, and how are those provisioned, and what is the language used there? Is it inclusive of the values that you want to cover? You know, the fact that you got chosen family in one of your contracts is absolutely amazing. And I'm super, super stoked to hear that. And again, how is spouse, partner, or family defined in that contract? Health insurance, you know, this is less of a problem today, but proof of relationship requirements, are they comparable of a burden to non-LGBTQ married couples? Like, do queer couples need to prove their relationship in a different way than non-LGBTQ couples? That's an important provision to look at. That has been a problem in the past. Are there aspects to health benefits that need to be negotiated directly with the insurance provider? This comes up, for example, one of when we were dealing with this case with another employer and gender affirming care coverage, they were claiming that their plan covered everything it needed to cover. They got a perfect score from the Human Rights Campaign on their corporate equality index, and their insurance company said, "Oh, this program is completely WPATH compliant." And WPATH, by the way, is the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It's kind of the standard for gender affirming care. And it was an interesting situation because the insurance carrier was saying that their plan was WPATH compliant, but when you go read the WPATH standards, you can't really automatically exclude 24, I think it was, procedures and automatically assume that those are cosmetic, right? One of the previous panelists was talking about there being a pool of money to cover gap coverage, and this is that kind of gap coverage. So fortunately, the union was able to negotiate coverage of those 24 items that the plan had previously excluded, and they were able to win that in part by with our help at Pride at Work, finding the path forward to argue that no, this isn't actually WPATH compliant, and we're going to make an issue of that. So yeah, I talked about gender affirming care. Is it WPATH compliant? Your leave is the same way. Bereavement and compassionate leave. Do your contract provisions for the leave in the event of death or family member are they LGBTQ inclusive definitions of family? Chosen family is a really awesome standard to strive for, but it's a hard one to get. Sick leave, same way. Does your contract include provisions for members to use their sick leave to take care of a family member? What if, especially this can be important for LGBTQ families when there's a child involved. In many cases, both parents may not be legally the parent of that child, or may not have legal guardianship, or there could be questions of that. So making sure that your leave provisions are inclusive enough to include all of the families that are in your local is crucially important. Workplace safety. This is one that a lot of folks don't think about, but under workplace safety are things like harassment, but also things like bathroom access, right? Because that is a workplace safety issue. If you don't have access to a restroom facility, that could cause health issues, that can cause all sorts of things. So workplace safety is a really important place to look for LGBTQ inclusion. Does your contract include language that addressing harassment, bullying, or workplace violence? And is that LGBTQ inclusive? There are all sorts of ways that LGBTQ people put up with harassment and bullying and workplace violence that is sometimes it's not clear that that's covered by the contract. If somebody's making jokes about queer people, is that covered? If they're asking inappropriate questions, right? As queer people, we get a lot of inappropriate questions sometimes, and folks have real issues with boundaries. I've been asked things like, well, which one of you is the husband and which is the wife? What? Excuse me? Or, probably the worst inappropriate question that I can think of is asking a trans or non-binary person their surgical status, right? Like, that is effectively asking them what genitalia they have under their clothes. It is just completely inappropriate. You wouldn't ask this of any other coworker. Why on earth people ask this question, but it happens all the time. Does your union or workplace have education and training programs for union stewards, employees, and/or management that focuses on workplace safety and respect? It's a place to put LGBTQ inclusion. always excited, and I'm excited this year to be going back to Black Lake for UAW International's civil rights training this year. So I'll be training there for if anybody is planning on going to that. You know, these things are included in UAW's trainings, and it's really exciting to see that because not every union has these kind of trainings. And is contractor employer zero tolerance language if it hopefully doesn't exist, but it's because that gets a little squishy, but is it inclusive of LGBTQ issues? You know, in other words, going back to the first piece, if the contract language is addressing harassment, bullying, workplace violence, sexual harassment, et cetera, are LGBTQ folks included in that? And if you have labor management issues, which hopefully you do you address those workplace safety issues in labor management meetings? Because sometimes you can solve a lot of these issues in the labor management meetings without having to fight through contract renegotiations or something like that. So what education and training would be useful for your members, leaders, and for the employee, right? Like making sure that popular education is a critical component of what we do in the labor movement, and making sure that all of our members are covered in that training, and that our issues are highlighted and that we can see ourselves in that training is absolutely important. So on the screen is, this is model non-discrimination language that I pulled off of our website. We have a bunch of resources on prideatwork.org, but this is Unite Here's model non-discrimination language, and we use it quite frequently because it's kind of a everything in the kitchen sink sort of policy that is as inclusive as it could be, and is simple language that could be inserted in almost any contract. Obviously, there are different pieces that can be pulled in and out, but you can see that sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression are all included in there. With that, I will wrap up, but you can see on the screen, there's my contact information, prideatwork.org. Like I said, we have a ton of resources on prideatwork.org about everything from discrimination to bathroom access to model contract language. We're definitely going to have some more when I get a hold of the two previous panelists' contracts. And I just wanted to also give a shout out. Pride at Work is having our own convention in August. Another way that you can get involved and learn a lot more and learn from folks in other unions is to come to our convention. You can learn more on our website or at outfordemocracy.com. And we'd love to see you there. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Those slides were really, really helpful and really informative. I'm definitely really struck after hearing all three of you present your slides and talk off the cuff about I guess kind of the power of contracts. I mean, it makes me think about whenever I first became a union organizer and got involved with bargaining in 2018 and again in 2021. I mean, we've been bargaining contracts pretty much the entire time I've been a grad student, but I never thought that like contracts could be so interesting and so spicy and so powerful and meaningful. And, I think Lisa, you kind of made this point about like setting, you were talking about this in the context of being a leader in your union and setting these cultural norms from the top. But the way that contracts really do have that power to set cultural norms and to shift the culture in a workplace. And I think that's really important. And I'm glad that we can spend this panel during Pride Month just talking about contracts. I never would have thought that like they could be so meaningful, but they really, really are. And I guess one question that I want to pose to all of you, and I think all of us, I know all of us have had experience doing contract negotiation. I'm wondering what is the most common pushback that you tend to face from the employer side negotiating team when it comes to trying to incorporate these queer and trans protections in contract language? Anyone can answer. I'm pretty sure we've all had these experiences.
I would be happy to start very briefly. I will say that, the tension that we have between our employers' very progressive values and our negotiating is often they say, one, I think that we have the leg up in some ways in that we don't necessarily have to spend as much time educating folks as to, what various terms mean or why these things are important to people. But I think that the roadblock we often run into is that an employer will throw up their hands and say, yeah, we want to provide that thing too, but this third party, like the health insurance company or, this disability policy just doesn't allow it. And so what we've found really useful is being creative and kind of how to address those problems. So if we have this structural barrier that we cannot change what's in this contract between the employer and this third party, well, let's make the employer kind of, put their money where their mouth is and ensure that these members are still getting the benefits that they should be, that everybody else is going to be receiving. And so let's ensure that there are pots of money they can draw from for their specific needs that aren't being met and things like that. But I would love to hear from other folks as well about this issue.
I recall like one story in particular that always just kind of blew my mind when it was happening. So here at Harvard, since like the graduate student union space is pretty young for like private institutions. A lot of these institutions will hire like these big union busting outside firms to do the bargaining for them. And so instead of sitting across the table from management as we typically would, we sit across the table from like a 75-year-old lawyer who isn't quite up with the times as perhaps some of the younger, more progressive folks in management's office. And so the one experience that I had that really stands out to me that I still can't believe is we talked about making incorrect like honorifics and university records right. And we had to explain to the lawyer what an honorific was. He had no clue. And I had to explain that like my records shouldn't say Mr., which I never indicated. It should say MX or mix. And he just didn't even know. Like I don't know. It's just like things like that, especially when you're like bargaining with a big firm that perhaps might not be as involved with like queer issues and stuff. You will have to do a lot of educating at the table, which wastes a lot of bargaining time. I should just be able to just propose things and it should just be heard in good faith. I shouldn't have to do the extra legwork to ensure that, they're meeting the standards of 2022. But what can you do?
Yeah, I agree with both of those things. The third party stuff, having to educate at the table, but like it's so frequently cost, right? Like they throw up cost. Oh, it's going to cost us so much money, whether that's adding a gender neutral bathroom, or whether that's gender affirming care, or whether that's something else. It's always cost. And then, when you actually look into it, the cost isn't always that great. They're typically exaggerating. That's why we do our homework, right? Like doing our homework and knowing how much it costs, knowing if, like I was saying in the presentation, this has been offered elsewhere and what that experience was is so critically important when you go into these contract negotiations, because they're going to throw up every roadblock they can.
Yeah, thank you all for that input. It's making me think about too, what can we do when these roadblocks do come up, right? And I should say I'm loving the questions in the chat. I'm adding them to my list and I'll try my best to get to all of them. So one thing I'm wondering is if folks have ideas or anecdotes about what we can do to validate that need for certain protections that our employer might be unfamiliar with. I'm sure I know some examples that we've used within our own contract, mine and Kobe's, for example, bringing in experts to talk to them whenever, maybe the position that you're in. For us as grad students speaking to administrators, they don't really think of us as on equal footing when it comes to bargaining, which I'm sure happens in a lot of workplaces. But yeah, I'm curious to hear if folks have thoughts about what we can do to sort of validate those needs that employers might just be unfamiliar with. And it's okay if the answer is we don't know. We're figuring it out. I see someone in the chat saying bargaining surveys and focus groups. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Bargaining surveys, like if your local doesn't run bargaining surveys, it absolutely should. That is a wealth of information that we typically get every bargaining round. And especially when you're in like the early days of bargaining and putting proposals together, that is a huge help in putting that stuff together. And it also is good to like check the pulse of your unit too, to make sure like that you are accurately well representing the folks that are under you. A great way you can also bargain for these things is package it with a bunch of other things too. Like you can push for things that protect queer people while also pushing for racial justice and also protecting disability. You can push for all those things all at once, especially when you're talking about those non-discrimination clauses. And so perhaps folks in your unit might not be super in tune with queer issues. You can always package that together with other things and push it as one big package, especially if you're thinking about those protected classes.
Yeah, on that same note, I'm wondering, Lisa, if you could say anything about the process of what surveying our queer community members in the workplace looks like for what they need in a contract. I know we all talked about having a diverse negotiating team and how important that is, because of course that's one way to have someone in the room who's going to be noticing things that other folks might not, that are necessary in a contract. But knowing the importance of membership surveys and being able to bring the word of our constituents, per se, to the employer side negotiating team, if you have any thoughts about that process.
Sure. I think one of the first things I can say is that in the survey itself, language matters. I think that one of the real benefits I have from my membership is that they'll educate me if I'm wrong on something, or if I need to grow someplace, they'll let me know. And that's a really wonderful thing to have in a membership, honestly. And so it forces me to always be thinking about these issues when thinking about reaching out to members and doing a survey for bargaining, things like that. I'll also say that a lot of the issues are things that kind of come up on a semi-regular basis. And so one of the things I found really helpful in thinking about like outreach to membership, especially in regards to putting together a survey, is just kind of recording the various issues that we're regularly getting contacted about, right? Whatever sort of provisions in the contract are not being enforced properly, or benefits that folks can't use. I just have a running list and I kind of continually add to it as things come up. And it's a great way to kind of start identifying what some of these issues are. I also think that it's not just like, especially I think for our membership, our contracts are usually at least 2 or 3 years. And so it's not as if we just stop talking to people in between. And so ensuring that, we have caucuses that have leadership within them and do regular things with membership around their constituencies is really important. Showing up to events that they're holding, and just kind of finding ways to connect with people on a regular basis is actually really just important in understanding and in understanding what the issues are, as well as ensuring that members feel connected to you enough to come to you when something perhaps very personal is affecting them. And so I think these are all kinds of things that I think about when putting together a survey and ensuring that we're meeting our members' needs.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's sort of also making me think about one way that I thought was really wonderful that our union during our last negotiation round brought in workers, so that if there was anything that we missed in the surveying process, or if there was any vocabulary that we weren't aware of as a bargaining team, or I wasn't on the bargaining team, but I was on the executive board at the time, was open bargaining and open contract proposal drafting too. Whenever we were working on articles that we wanted to write a proposal for, that we thought were really we really wanted community feedback from, for example, things about harassment and discrimination, any member could come to a meeting and help us write that and provide comments on it. I don't know, Kobe, you want to say any more about that? Because you were very involved in that process.
Oh, it was great. We just keep these things through our open channels of communication, and we just let them be known. I don't know if we necessarily did enough organizing to ensure folks came out to those, but they were always open to anyone who wanted to join us for proposal drafting. A lot of this happened over the summer. Again, academic units, very hard to organize over the summer, but it was a really great process, and it allowed us as the bargaining team to like delegate duties, so it's not on all of us all the time, but also get a diverse, just good diverse input that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, and Jeremy, one question that I have for you regarding all this is, you know, the resources that Pride at Work have are amazing, and I really wish I had spent more time with them whenever we were drafting proposals for both our first and second contract. And I know R had sort of a similar question about how can we be certain that the recommendations that we're talking about here tonight apply to all the sectors in Region 9A, or just, you know, to unions in general. I think Pride at Work does a good job of sort of generalizing the recommendations, so you can sort of put yourself in the shoes of how does this apply to my union. But I think that can be especially pressing whenever we're dealing with locals that, as R pointed out, maybe have a more traditional or conservative culture, or maybe we're experiencing pushback from our own members.
Yeah, that's, you know, it's always tough. Precedent matters. So having those, one of the things that I have tried to impress upon folks is how important it is to have progressive locals and to use them as models for how to get things done in the less progressive locals, right? Like we have this all over the labor movement. And I just had a situation where in one of the unions, someone was asking me, you know, well, how do we get this very same issue? You know, they were having they recently formed an LGBTQ caucus in that union, but for whatever reason, the leadership had decided that not to send any of those people to the union convention. So they couldn't speak on any of the resolutions, or like it was bizarre. And she was like, you know, I don't know what to do because they put their foot down. And I said, well, you have progressive locals, right? Like some big progressive locals that can move and shake on their own, correct? And they were like, yeah, sure. And I said, well, surely they have some queer members in their local who can be sent as part of that locals delegation to the convention. So using those progressive, thinking outside the box and using the tools that you have and the resources that you have in interesting and different ways is what's important, because it's going to take time to educate, as we've talked about, but sometimes the best thing to do is try to find a way to work around. And if you can't work around, then that's when you organize and you replace that leadership with somebody who's much more progressive. You know, I'm a firm advocate for you know, running a progressive slate against the conservative status quo anytime we can.
That's really good advice. That's really wise. I think that's really I'm thinking about that right now because the convention is very soon. It's very soon. So I hope that all of our locals are doing as much as we can to make sure that the folks that we're sending, whether they're delegates or guests or our executive board leaders who are going to be going there, are trying to represent the needs of everyone in our union. I know that's something we've been working out a lot in our own local. And, you know, Jeremy, you just mentioned about the role of caucuses, right? And that's something I did want to ask for everyone here about if you do have working groups or caucuses that do focus on queer and trans issues. I think, Lisa, you mentioned that you do have that. I know that certainly we have that in our own union, but sort of how did those come about, and what sort of projects have they done work on more recently?
Toby, I don't know if you wanted to start. I did before, so I just want to make sure that you have enough. All right. Well, I think that the good news is that for our more established local or our more established chapters in our local, they've been around longer than I have. So I think that it is a reflection of the values that our membership already has. And so I do see that that is a real benefit to be starting in a place that some other folks aren't already. I will say that a lot of the things that our caucus is focused on, especially the LGBTQ caucus, is ensuring that the rights of our clients are respected, both by employers, right, in terms of how other folks in the unit will speak about them, how we'll have the right technology to ensure that folks like gender identity is properly recorded and used by everybody within the organization, as well as outside of the organization as best as possible. And then also kind of uplifting things both to membership and to the public at large that are issues that face LGBT folks and clients specifically for the most part, right? I think one of the things that I'm really proud of is that every year our local shows up for, Trans Day of Action, for example, among other things. And so these are ways in which our caucus has found to meaningful ways for us to engage and elevate other voices that don't necessarily have the same privileges that our members do, whether it be in the workplace or in other forums within society. And so I think that's some of the wonderful work that our various caucuses are doing.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I feel like Kobe or I could speak about this, about some of the projects that have come out of our own, the Feminist Working Group, formerly the Time Subcommittee within HGSU, that pertain to queer workers' rights. And one that comes to mind is the survey that we did of, so academia is like such a weird, it really doesn't like look the same as many other workplaces. I know all of us have very unique workplaces, but within different departments, people often will write demands letters to their department, within the English department, the Earth Science department, history, whatever it may be. And we were able, through our Feminist and Racial Justice Working Group, come together and survey all of those letters and pull out what demands were similar or the same among them, so that we could bring that information to the university. And we actually used a lot of that information whenever we went back to the bargaining table, because this was something that we did in sort of an off year. And it makes me think about some of the questions that, one that I wanted to ask and one that I saw someone also put in the chat about, maybe Jeremy, you might know about this from your work with other unions, about if you know of any unions that have taken an intersectional approach to the work that we're talking about here, because obviously intersectionality matters in contract negotiations and in implementation, because queer workers are also people of color, women, Indigenous people, disabled people. And how can we really honor the entire experience and identity of queer people in the workplace when we're doing this kind of organizing?
Traditionally, things have been rather siloed. The way that things are structured, even now with, for example, within the AFL-CIO structure, there are 6 constituency groups. There's an LGBTQ group, there's one for Black workers, there's one for immigrant worker, for Latino workers, one for Asian workers, one for women. We have only recently, these constituency groups really started to figure out how to work together and do that kind of work, right? We formed a coalition group that we call Progressive Workers Coalition. And so that is the 6 AFL-CIO constituency groups working together. And we just formed it last year. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to figure out not only how do we work together, but how do we get our unions and the AFL-CIO, but also our unions to be more intersectional in how they look at things. So I don't have the best answer, because traditional union work keeps so many things siloed. But certainly the intersectional way that LGBTQ people show up, I've been having that conversation with folks for ever is like, you know, well, there are Black LGBTQ people, there are disabled LGBTQ people, there are, you know, go down the list, immigrants, etc. And getting that across and helping them understand that you know, we have to look at every community, and so that's why we show up for every community is just so difficult sometimes because they don't understand. They always look at us, you know, Pride at Work is very frequently, when we deal with LGBTQ issues, looked at as a white organization. Well, those are white people issues, and it's like, no, they're not. They're everybody's issues, you know, it's a conversation that has to continue, and you know, I'm really happy that we have formed this Progressive Workers Coalition to really figure that out because, you know, well, one example is the A. Philip Randolph Institute, which is a constituency group for Black workers. We are actually invited to their annual conference, to their board meeting this summer in July, to have a conversation about trans workers specifically, because they posted some rather inappropriate stuff on their Facebook page. And we reached out to them like, whoa, we need to take that down like yesterday. And you know, we talked about it, and one of the things that they realized was how little they knew about trans issues and trans people. So that's one of the things that we're working on is getting a group from our organization of trans and non-binary and other folks to go and just sit down and have a conversation with everybody at the A. Philip Randolph Institute and educate them on how they need to be more intersectional and how they approach their work.
Yeah, that's great. And it's good to know that's a conversation that's starting to happen more and more, because I think one thing that anyone in union leadership will quickly learn is if you're not thinking about the folks who are most marginalized in your unit, you're going to quickly have a very small and very narrow-minded like a unit, and also ability to address these issues that are really important that are facing the workers that are in your union. And I also want to make sure folks saw Michaela's point in the chat about how Region 9A does have a subcommittee that wants to create these tools and resources for locals about bringing intersectional lenses into your contracts. So make sure to hit her up, or Kevin or Angie or R. And another thing this has got me thinking about, especially with talk about like trainings. I know we talked about trainings earlier. I know that's something that we also have in our contract. And maybe trainings are the answer to this question, maybe they're not. But one thing I'm wondering is both for Kobe and for Lisa, for your own unions, what do you think are the most common ways that your union is intervening on behalf of queer and trans workers in the workplace? Could be like, I don't know. One thing I think about, and the reason I thought of Kobe for this question, because I know both them and I have done a lot of this, is like grievances and also connecting workers to resources, because I think unions have a lot of very official capacity to do things, to file a step 1 grievance and go to arbitration and show up to the bargaining table and do all these things. But we also, I think that one thing I really love about our union is that it is also sort of a social place. It's a place where people build community, and the community building aspect of unions is really important. We have an absolutely bonkers queer student workers group chat that is like really important for our union. And I think that sort of informal connection, that informal work that comes with being queer, I think is really important. It's a really important part of this work.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I was having trouble, like grievances always, I think like, yeah, we all kind of do grievances. So like, I don't know if that's like important enough for me to address, but I think the aspect of like affinity groups and like using the union apparatus to also be like social is a big important piece of it. Like the reason I joined my union as soon as I came to this university was because someone reached out and it allowed me to build like a social circle right off the bat, right? And that was really enticing to me. I work in a medical school lab. And if you know about like the medical sciences in like the university system, those can be very, I like the way Jeremy put it earlier, but like it's a very siloed space. We think about science only, and it's very hardcore in ways you don't want it to be hardcore. And so one thing we're doing this summer is we're holding like medical school socials where we just get a bunch of workers together, we just hang out, we eat food, and we just talk, we get time a break from work. Those spaces are super, super, super important. Like unions are built off community and like shared struggle and like shared interests and things. Don't forget that community aspect of it, right? And so one thing, and I'm thinking of ways we can make these socials better. It would be awesome to have like a feminist working group or like a queer student workers social on a medical campus, just to bring that specific cohort of folks together, because we often don't get together and hang out and talk to each other. So I'm getting ideas, and hopefully we'll see those put into action this summer as like the academic stuff is winding down.
I just have to say, I don't really have anything to add because I think that my examples were also kind of like disciplinary issues or filing grievances on behalf of members, as well as kind of finding, social ways to connect people so they're not just talking about, an identity, but they have other things in common and not just work, ways to kind of bridge those gaps when people maybe aren't being together in person anymore or whatever. But I will say that the reason I unmuted is I was just so excited to see how excited you were, Kobe, about all of these ideas that you're having. And I'm going to take some of that energy, I think, back to my local and try to find other ways to do social events like this and find ways to support people and create these spaces that I think are really important and necessary for folks. And to not forget what a priority that should be for us. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and this is sort of getting us into this space of ways beyond contract language, like that we can use to support queer and trans workers in our workplaces. And, we are using the example of just like the community building aspect of unions and, of course, trainings that if they're mandated for everybody, that is hopefully something that is helping out queer and trans workers by just doing that sort of education and making sure that your union has a part in creating those trainings so that you can be sure that the language is progressive and things like that. And it's also got me thinking about running certain campaigns. One of the most central campaigns for HGSU has always been Real Recourse, which is our desire to be able to use our contract for all types of power and identity-based harassment and discrimination. So that includes queer and transphobia and ableism and racism and any kind of harassment or discrimination. But those kind of campaigns that are, have consequences for contract language, but also have a way of bringing people in and allowing them to have a voice in their union, I think are really important. And it also makes me think about a committee that we have that Kobe and I both really got our start in called SEEK, the Contract Enforcement and Education Committee, which is the space where we handle grievances, but we also focus on contract education, because we all know that if you have a contract that has great language in it, if no one knows about it, it doesn't matter. You need to make sure that your members are aware of their rights. I mean, so many times we have people filing grievances with us and they just don't really know. They don't really know the rights that they have in their contract. Gosh, there's so many important questions that I want to ask. I think I only have time for a couple more. So one that I want to get to is one that Ara had asked earlier, is given the current state of the Supreme Court and LGBTQ plus rights, are there any potential roadblocks that we see in the near or distant future? And this question can be for anybody.
I can jump in on that. You bring up the Supreme Court and it just automatically gives me like a chill down my spine. Like, we're in a weird situation where the country is far more progressive than the court is today. And, I'm sure everybody saw the leaked draft opinion that's going to eviscerate Roe v. Wade. And it's a rather scary idea to think about because of the underpinnings of Roe, right? Like it's like fundamentally based on our right to privacy. And if you look at other cases that are based on the right to privacy, interracial marriage, same-sex marriage, the end of the ban on sodomy laws, like all of these things are based around kind of the same ideas and principles that Roe was decided on. So like it's scary to think that a majority of the justices today have an opinion that we don't really have a right to privacy that's in the Constitution. That's a huge roadblock, and with the Senate being where it is today, at 50-50 and going nowhere, we've already seen that Joe Manchin is not interested in fixing anything around Roe. And neither he nor Kirsten Sinema are interested in getting rid of the filibuster in order for us to pass things with 50 votes instead of 60 votes. And then now we have an election coming up in the fall where, every prediction says that the House is going to shift control to the Republican Party. And there's, a lot of debate about whether or not what the makeup of the Senate will look like too. So, I think on the federal level, things are going nowhere except for backwards because the Supreme Court's going to take us backwards and we don't have a Congress that's going to take us forward. And there's only so much that the president can do.
I think that, the one thing that I can add to that, and I wholeheartedly endorse everything that you've already said, is that even though we are looking at a really scary future, and we have certainly already lived through a scary 4 years, one of the things that I find really heartening is that I see this as a real opportunity to start bringing more people into the movement and to find more ways to connect with folks who maybe don't see the natural connection of what it means to be in a union, what it means to organize, what it means to push back against employers and things like that. And so, I agree that things may get worse before they get better, but, I'm certainly not a young person anymore, but looking at social media and talking to folks who are 10 years younger than me, they have had very different lived experiences than I have. And they are angry in ways that, I wasn't growing up because of all of the things that have kind of been stripped and taken from them, that were promised in some ways by older generations. And so what I really hope is at the very least that I am, continuing to build this path to a more progressive society in general. I think unions are certainly one way in which we can accomplish those goals. But I will say that I'm very excited to see the people who are coming up behind me as well. And I can't wait to see, how they take all of this anger that is so, deserved and rightful and use it to really change all of the things that we're so frustrated with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I want to jump in too. I know we talked, there's like a federal and state elections coming up this year. We also have, I don't want you to forget, we have the UAW like international board elections coming up this year, right? And so this is sort of an opportunity for us, since there is a lot of like rank and file energy within our union now. A lot of people are caring about the direction our union is going, like to be really attentive to the folks that you consider to vote for. Like we're very lucky as a region to have a director that's attentive and respectful of queer rights and things, right? But not every region has that privilege. And so it's very important to think about and organize with our workers within the UAW to ensure we elect a new international executive board that is willing to take on queer issues and intersectional issues at the top level of our union. That way we can lobby through the government. That way we can have wonderful communications for international and support, and as well as push for a lot of these progressive provisions in our contracts from the very, very top, right? I think that's super important, speaking about our specific union space, and it's something that's very actionable for us because it is kind of like a micro political environment, right? So I don't want to forget that point. Like Lisa said, unions, one way to do it And we can make our union better this year by paying attention to our own union politics.
Thank you so much, you three. That was all agree with all of it. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, so I'm going to go to Matthew's question. I think Matthew had a raised hand, and then I'm going to ask one more question and we can wrap it up.
Sure. It's not really a question. It's more of like a suggestion or a thought exercise. But, I think we all recognize that, we got some higher ed locals. I'm from a higher ed local particular as well. And then nonprofit, we're starting from a somewhat different space, not perfect, but, leg up. I would be really interested if, because the locals that I've been working on or helping with, that's not where they're at. They're like, that's just not where my local is. We're interested. It's, niche issues. A lot of organizing necessary, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's really great to get contract language that can set, some boundaries. But if you don't have the organization, right, and the work, you're just not going to win it anyways, right? Even with your own members. So I was just thinking it would be really great. There's so many exceptionally knowledgeable people here, actually, especially queer people, if we could make ourselves available or, to other locals, right? Beyond just that, like a group of people that, have different knowledges and experiences, right, that can talk through some of these locals that are a little bit more conservative, right, but have members that need our help, right? How do you organize around these issues? What is education, et cetera, et cetera? That way it's not always through kind of like these ad hoc things, so I think it would be really cool, to develop some sort of kind of like queer just like collective group of like knowledgeable people that are willing to volunteer their time for some of the locals that are not starting from the privileged space that we are. Because I know our contract has been gender neutral for decades. Like we have gender identity, we have HIV status, we have all these stuff, but a lot of people aren't starting there. So I think it would be great if the region can get something like that going,
Yeah, I love that idea, Matthew, and I'm glad Art put that in the chat that they're going to add to the CHRC agenda at that point, because I think that would be amazing. I'm very much in support of that. I just had one more question I wanted to make sure we get to before we wrap up and do announcements. This is somewhat directed to Jeremy, but anyone can answer this. We have someone who was wondering if Pride at Work has any suggestions about enforcing gender affirming healthcare when most of the times our contracts leave healthcare out of the negotiation. For example, we talked about expense funds and these pools, and if there have been any unions who've been able to make progress on this. And someone was specifically asking about, for example, coverage of things like facial feminization surgery.
Yeah, the example that I was talking about earlier, that was one of the provisions that they did get covered. It was at U.S. Steel. U.S. Steel. So here's the thing, right? Like it depends on the employer, and how susceptible they are to different things. Like for example, in this case with U.S. Steel, they're very proud of their 100 on the HRC Corporate Equality Index, and they tout that they got that 100, and they're very proud of it. So publicly shaming them and telling them that they're not living up to the values that they claim that they live up to is an important tool in the toolbox. So that's definitely one way of enforcing it is literally saying, you like that was one of our arguments when we went back to U.S. Steel was, you have this 100 on the Corporate Equality Index, but it's very clear that your coverage excludes 24 things. Some of them are very important to, a subset of people. So how can you go around touting that, you do everything that you can for the LGBTQ community whenever you don't cover these things that won't cost you much, if anything, in the long run? So that's obviously one way. I think, the other thing, and it's kind of related back to Matthew's comment, is there are, and I don't know how it works with UAW per se, but a number of unions set bargaining standards from the top, right? Like they have a list of things that are very clear, we will bargain for these, and there are things on the strike list and so forth. and getting your union to be more inclusive from the top, and getting more of those things that we want in our contracts on the bargaining list for the whole union, even if that means, like, you know, a number of groups throughout the labor movement in different unions have sought to change the union's constitution, right, to be more inclusive. So those are some of the other ways, is kind of forcing people's hands. If it's a dictate from on high that we're going to make this a bargaining priority, then you know, you have a little more something to stand on when it comes to time at the negotiating table.
Oh, sorry, Kobe, were you going to add?
I just wanted to add really fast. Expense funds are really great if you're in a situation where your employer won't directly bargain over the terms of a healthcare plan. We have an expense fund. It's several $100,000s per year, and it goes up every single fiscal year. And student workers can submit expenses to that fund, and they'll do some validation to make sure that, like, they're in the bargain unit and things. But outside of that, like, it's the bill. We verify what's on the bill, and the management never sees that. They just kind of, we have this like system of trust, right? And like, queer healthcare isn't ever I want to say, like, exposed to management. Like, they don't know what kinds of procedures folks go through and things. This is sort of like a fund that we're able to manage and mutually understand that, like, these workers deserve the right to privacy when it comes to their medical care and things. So expense funds is a great way to avoid the issue of not being able to bargain over the terms of your healthcare. Like us, we have a student health plan, which they refuse to bargain over. So we have that fund to ensure costs are defrayed.
I could honestly talk to you three about these issues all day, but I know that we do need to wrap it up soon. So, you know, I'm like what Lisa was saying earlier about kind of like, we are looking at some scary things ahead, and there, you know, in the past we've all faced some scary things as the queer community, and I think that it's important to end on a note of hope. And I think that unions do give me a lot of hope. Being involved in the labor movement has been really meaningful for me, and for my identity as a queer person, and being able to organize alongside other queer unionists has been really something that fills my cup. And so I'm really, really happy to have been able to speak with you all tonight about this. And I'm just going to share my screen onto the resource list that R has been wonderfully compiling throughout this evening. We'll make sure to send these to folks who are registered for this event. R, was there anything you wanted to say about this resource list?
Yes, I'll just add that I see Matthew's share the UMass grad students contract, so I'll add that after the event, and we'll send out the updated list after the event.
Amazing. Thank you so much for putting this together. And finally, I just want to end with some announcements. Kevin, do you want to talk about the Juneteenth announcements?
Yes. Okay. So for Juneteenth, if you saw our project last year, you know we did like a video montage with for Juneteenth, where people were basically giving us your thoughts about what Juneteenth is and what it means to you. So this year we're going to do something similar. So if you send us your photo and you send us a statement about what Juneteenth means to you, then we'll put together another similar video montage like we did last year. And also for Juneteenth, we're going to be compiling videos and photographs of Juneteenth events around the region. So if you attend a Juneteenth celebration, take some pictures, take some videos, and we want to put that together and you know, display that on our social media, the Juneteenth celebration. A couple of other housekeeping issues I wanted to touch on. Okay, the Constitutional Convention is in July, so we won't be holding any events in July, and August is the committee's break month. So we kind of, you know, get to regroup. And upcoming for September, we have the Hispanics Heritage Month. In October, we're going to have the National Disabilities Employment Awareness Month. In November, we're going to have Native American Heritage Month and Veterans Day. Also in September, we're going to be doing a voting rights forum #2, because we did one already this year. We're going to, and midterms are coming up, and this election is going to be extremely important. And you all know what I'm talking about. Just look what happened, what's going on with the Supreme Court. So, and with that, last words, every time we do an event like this, we basically draw a line in the sand, right? Saying that we're not going to ignore the injustices. We're not going to turn our backs when we find inequality and discrimination, but we're going to stand with our union family. And we're going to stand with our family outside the union to promote equality, equity, diversity, and inclusion amongst our members and within our communities. And we recognize that none of these events will happen without participants like you tuning in. So we thank you for that. We thank you for joining us tonight, and we thank you for being part of the Region INA's Human and Civil Rights Council's Moving Forward movement for justice and equality. And we hope you will join us in our future events. And unless anybody has anything else to add, say goodnight.
Thank you to our speakers. Thank you so much. So happy to talk with you all. And thank you everybody for coming.
Thanks, everyone. See you in September or sooner. Bye.
Bye.